Welcome to Our Future is Kind, a podcast exploring how we build the future we want to live in, one kind act at a time. I'm your host, Michael Neese, president of Our Future is Kind, and your companion in conversations about kindness, leadership, connection, and courage. Each week, I sit down with thoughtful leaders, creators, and bridge builders to explore what a healthier, more humane future could look like, and the choices it takes to build it. These are honest conversations about purpose, culture, curiosity, and what it really means to show up for one another at work, in our communities, and in everyday life. Along the way, we'll unearth practical ideas, small but meaningful acts, and questions worth sitting with, because building what's next is a choice. So let's dive in. Meral Alizada is an ex-lawyer who went into psychology and then founded the consultancy and thought leadership firm Results of Kindness. At that consultancy, they systematize kindness into workplaces, governance institutions, and education. Welcome to the program, Meral Alizada.
It's an honor to be here, genuinely.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you here. You are such a great guest to have on this program.
I completely fell in love with the idea of the future being kind, and it's a rising buzzword. And when I spoke to you, as you said, as you gave me that honor, some people truly embody the mission that they hold, and you are one of those people, for sure.
Well, I'm glad to be in the presence of another. So I just introduced you to our audience, but I would love for you to tell everybody who's listening and watching, what makes you...
I'm going to make sure that it's a short enough answer. I think everyone goes through a period in their entrepreneurial journey. I know the term entrepreneur is thrown around quite loosely, where they have to be honest about themselves and they have to understand what their profile, what their fingerprint of entrepreneurship is. And for me, it cannot be separated from the spiritual, from the almost esoteric, from the emotional, if we can even call it that. So while I spent the last 2 years introducing myself as a consultant, as a systems architect, I really believe that I'm almost falling into thought leadership far more and combining and bringing back the spirituality that I've always held into the robust systemic concept of kindness. So for me, now coming into personal development and not just purely a business consultancy, I would now consider myself more generally as a kindness thought leader, still a systems architect, but really not a pioneer, but really someone who is advocating for kindness as infrastructure, as the next force of civilizational transformation. And that, of course, requires the human soul. That, of course, requires inner kindness that I'm rediscovering in my life. And I'm now not shy and I'm not scared of bringing the human and the soft into my work. Whereas before it was very much results backed. It was data driven. But now I'm falling in love with the human element of kindness all over again and not shy to bring that. So kindness thought leader, someone who wants to row us towards a civilization of kindness, which of course requires that human element. I can't do it alone. It's with people like yourself. It's a huge, huge mission. So that's me.
You keep bringing up the word infrastructure. And I think for the people who are listening in, I mean, how can infrastructure be kind?
See, the thing is kindness as infrastructure, while I've originated a certain blend of it, so systemic kindness that becomes infrastructure, that's scaled as architecture and becomes an ecosystem, we have started to do this for as long as humanity has existed. So if we talk about the infrastructure of housing in Uzbekistan, which is one of the places that I'm from, and we see this across the world, it's not just there, it's just what I have been lucky to return to and to witness. The neighborly infrastructure, the household infrastructure, the street infrastructure is designed in such a way where it almost promotes social cohesion and it prevents loneliness. It's almost like a courtyard complex where people are almost forced to interact, forced to see each other, and easily accessible to each other. So that kind of neighborliness, that kind of village, the world is a village and humanity is a village. We have been living in that, and that has been the reason for our survival. It's not because we've always been little pods of individualism that we have now. We've lived in kind infrastructure across humanity. We also see that with the concept of kind cities. That was perhaps it was an idea that started, but perhaps hasn't been followed through. So it's about, for example, infrastructure, buildings, streets, workplaces that are inclusive of diversity, that are inclusive of neurodiversity. Whereas, for example, some shops have started doing this as well, and I think they've done it in Germany. And I spoke to a German businessman where he said instead of having loud, almost techno music while people were shopping, we introduced classical music. So the infrastructure, the auditory infrastructure, is kind because it considers that people have an inner equilibrium that they want to maintain, especially in these high volume, high density spaces where we shop. So we have lived in kind infrastructure for a very, very long time, and we're seeing this across the world. So infrastructure that is considerate of difference, infrastructure that enables for stillness, infrastructure that increases cognitive capacity rather than repairing it. This is all kind infrastructure. So that's just a snapshot of what I see as an oceanic philosophy. And that's probably why it's taking me so long just to finish off the first chapter, because it's a civilizational return. And I don't call it something novel. I call it a return to how we lived and how we thrived for millennia.
The idea that we can be thoughtful about how we design the world for each other and for the kindness to flow more easily, that is a centerpiece of Our Future is Kind. And so the synergies that we have, I think, are quite strong. As you were speaking, one of the thoughts that popped into my head was every year there is a list of the worst intersections in America. You go from one city to another and you find where there are the most auto accidents, where there are the most pedestrians who are hit by cars, and so on and so forth. So there's usually a top 10 list of intersections to avoid at all costs. And so I want you to comment on that. I want you to think about that. Would you consider those spaces that have been poorly designed, perhaps not intentionally unkind, but potentially not well designed, maybe not well thought out?
So that's fascinating, Michael, and I think it points to the human survival instinct that we have been churning out since the Industrial Revolution, where in order to reach a certain end, we sacrifice the very things that enable for the results that we all want to be sustained. So it's almost like a write-off. Let's write off, for example, pedestrian spaces. Let's write off, let's say, a little bit more land in order for us to get home quicker. And yet it's the very thing that causes those accidents. So I think it's really that, while I cannot comment on the exact technical dimensions, and that's something that perhaps an architect could do far better than I do, because I'm much more of a theorist and more of a visionary. But I think it really points to the fact that as human beings, especially when we're seeking something, and we do this all the time, it's a psychological phenomena. In order to reach a certain end, we bypass the very things that facilitate those ends to be fruitful, sustainable, and hold longevity. And we see this across the world. In workplaces, we churn out incredibly unnecessary processes, and we bypass a lot of these human factors in order to increase productivity. That ends up having a collateral of burnout, of the best people leaving, of neurodiversity not being understood, of genius not being facilitated. So we're so tunnel visioned in what we believe to be productive, what we believe to be intelligent, what we believe to be smart, because we're seeing it from the end goal. We're seeing it from, we just want to get results. We want to reach C, but we don't realize that A plus B equaling and sustaining C requires us to think about things from a position of sincerity, of the long term, and of the well-rounded understanding of what productivity, what safety, what speed actually requires. And it's the human element. So I think that we've created a world based on survival. So yes, people can get somewhere and reach, maybe 50% of the people reach somewhere easier and faster in these intersections. But there's something essential missing. It's the thoughtfulness and the consideration of human beings, because we've somehow almost flipped or pretended that human nature, that speed, that sustainability requires thoughtlessness and almost ignorance and almost an arrogance of what is required for something to be sustainable. So I believe that that is really it's one of those unfortunate symptoms and unfortunate manifestations of a wider problem where we have a very, very thin and very restricted and very false understanding of what productivity, retention, progress, safety requires, because the human element has been extracted out of it, the very thing that sustains everything else.
Everybody who's listening in is probably having their mind blown right now by the idea of thinking about kindness embedded in our infrastructure and our planning for the infrastructure. But I bet almost everybody who's listening in has been in at least one job where there is the equivalent to those intersections that are designed for speed and not necessarily for safety, or at least they've deprioritized the safety in prioritizing the speed. And that is being in a meeting where leaders don't necessarily want to hear all of the good ideas. They want to stick to one or two ideas, have those debated, get through the discussion quickly, and get to a solution, because there is this drive to be efficient. There's this drive to get to the solution quickly. Sometimes you overlook the best possibilities within the discussion. Do you have experience with that? Have you been in situations where you've tried to help leaders figure out how they can hear all the voices in the room? Because I've definitely heard the leaders in some cases say, all of this kindness stuff, hearing every opinion, we don't have time for that. That's all soft, and we need to move quickly. Have you been in those situations where you've had those kinds of leaders discussing why they make the choices that they make?
I'm almost lucky that I've never actually been in an executive leadership position other than in my consultancy, and we're a very small team, because I believe that employees are the greatest consultants of any company. And they are the ones who see what leaders perhaps never can unless they position themselves in the standpoint of the employee. The problem is that as an employee, I didn't have that much leverage. And I was not in a position where I could be listened to, because even with flat structures, there's always some element of hierarchy. So it's brilliant, because I've almost always had experiences like that, especially in the legal industry, which, and I think this is something that we see in England. And I've had conversations with leaders where they're saying that it's almost these dinosaur industries that are being forced on their knees now because they have refused any kind of real change in the name of tradition, in the name of ancient heritage. And it's really causing a lot of things to wane, and, brain drain and people flooding out as fast as they come in. So absolutely. And I think that almost every employee, I would say, unless they've had the most incredibly positive experience where they've worked with incredibly open-minded leaders, has had this experience. And I have had it across my work life in consultancy, in the NHS that I work in the National Health Service of the UK. And of course in law, I've had that across my time, because I've not just been an observer, but I've been very, very proactive. And I think being a neurodivergent, highly sensitive woman of color who comes from a background of Central Asia, including, war-experienced parents, I probably bring a perspective or a capacity to see things that perhaps others do miss because they haven't been in those fringes of society and in the intersection of all of these sub-identities. And I've found that it's interesting that you say, should we listen to every opinion? What we've got now is a pendulum. Either we don't listen at all, which is most of the time, or because equality and inclusion and diversity and the buzzword of kindness and the buzzword of empathy and the buzzword of psychological safety, what that's done is it's now almost requiring everyone to listen to every opinion, or at least giving the impression that we should listen to every opinion. Why are we swinging between such extremities? Because it's a rising buzzword, because we're not doing the sincere work to actually recognize where is the balance. Sometimes some decisions are going to be very, very cutthroat, and they're not going to require masses and masses of debate. This is what's happening now. A lot of companies peacock themselves as inclusive, where they get people to do all of these surveys, or they have these meetings, and they pretend that they're going to listen to every member, but then they do nothing about it, or they just don't listen. The sincere and the truly kind approach is thinking, where has a concern been raised? Is there a pattern? Can we consider this? Is this a substantive enough part of our work that's going to bring about innovation, that's going to bring about change, that is critical enough? And leaders have not been able to deliver on this particular issue. Then we can bring in those conversations. The problem is, and it's interesting because every case is different, the leaders who listen the least and think that they get to a solution fastest end up losing more time later because they didn't give that 20 minutes or that moment of intentional listening, of active listening, that could have really changed the trajectory of a decision, a process, a concept, a recruitment process, etc. So it's interesting because, again, and it points back to the phenomenon of the intersection, we think that we're being speedy and efficient and brilliant and getting along with things. But actually, we're costing ourselves more and more in the future, in the long term, because we're not actually able to look at this and think, okay, this is a substantive enough issue that if we roll back a little bit of time to assess, reassess, and remobilize, then we're going to actually, save X amount of time, save X amount of retention, save X amount of productivity. And the problem is, and with this, is that leadership is not spiritually sound. And I know that probably sounds very strange, but I've created a concept of leadership that's resting upon inner hygiene. If leaders only think from here and only think about the tangible, and they haven't done the work from within, such as their emotional blind spots that get in the way of their ability to receive information that could undermine, or could not perhaps undermine, but question their esoteric, brilliant genius, which can never be undermined, then everything continues in a cycle where, yes, you might get ticks on your to-do list, but will you keep up with the times, I wonder? And that's why I really, really believe that it's not just about saying to people in the boardroom, I'm here to listen to you, but for leaders to work from within so that they can remove some of these, I wouldn't call them baggages, because I think we hear a lot about people saying emotional baggage and trauma and all of those things, but the inner blocks from within that aren't just affecting the lives of others, but perhaps is affecting the inner life and the personal life of these leaders. So it's not just about, listening to every opinion. Sometimes you don't have to. But in order to have that foresight, in order to know when to listen, when to delegate, when to reconsider, when to question oneself, you need to work from within. We need emotionally coherent leaders who are not shy in facing their inner demons. I know that was a very long response. I just wanted to do it justice, that we need emotional, almost somatic coherence in our leaders so that they can actually listen, so that they can actually decide coherently, so that they can actually risk losing time in order to speed up. And we see this across our lives. And I will stop speaking now. Like I've given such a long answer, but it's so nuanced and absolutely.
I love the answer because it is very much it's the idea of we're looking out at the ocean and we're seeing tips of icebergs and thinking, oh, those are just little chunks of ice. But there's so much that is beneath the surface that doesn't get discussed, doesn't get considered, doesn't get in some way addressed, that then causes all of the other problems. I once worked for somebody who it was their goal every day to tend to their leader's emotional landscape, because their leader was so impossibly divorced from their emotions and what was governing how they conducted their work, that my direct supervisor had to daily think, oh no, will this set off my leader? Will this be the thing that gets them angry? Will this be the thing that delights them? But no longer could they try to contribute the things that they thought were the best answers. They had to contribute what they thought was going to cause the least amount of consternation later on with their leader. And so it was, me watching this dance from below and understanding exactly what was going on with the dance. I couldn't diagnose it for them. I couldn't tell them, because then I would suddenly become the target. And I did several times, and I was the target several times. But it also felt like I had to be genuine. I had to at least express, I think we have some issues. And I think we should be looking for the best solutions, not the ones that please my supervisor's supervisor. And so I absolutely resonate with what you were just talking about, because it feels like leaders want to be fast, and they are faced with so many different choices that they have to make on, from moment to moment. And in a high stakes environment where there are potential layoffs, where there are potential, quarterly results that rest on what they decide, it's understandable that they just don't want to hear the other opinions and they don't want to deal with the rest. But as you said, every single time I saw that happen, it always ended up in a car wreck. There was always a big problem at the end of those decisions because they hadn't listened to people in the first place, people that they had vetted carefully and then interviewed and hired. They suddenly just acted like that expertise didn't exist.
That's so interesting. There's just so many things. And, sometimes when we talk about the emotional dimension of leadership, I'm sure that you and I don't, you tell me, but I get so much skepticism and so much of a pushback. Meryl, this is all about the external. This is all about, decisions. This is all about appearing to be robust. And I remember being on a podcast with Dr. Ayaz, and I asked him about what's the most important quality of a leader. And he said, charisma. While he's a fantastic, brilliant human being, but he represents the most stereotypical, the most quintessential definition of a leader. It's always about the appearance. Charisma is very much about your ability to influence and present yourself to others. We don't talk about the inner dimension and how the 90% of your inner self is what breeds and is what almost creates the architecture for your external leadership, but it's so very much neglected. I'll tell you a very interesting story. So I do inner leadership coaching with founders and with CEOs, and I had a client who was working in a very, if I say it, it might be very, very specific, but a very, very high demand, very high pace, 4 offices across Europe and dealing with people from many, many, many different backgrounds. Now, there was something about him that was very apparent in our first meeting, and that was micromanagement, skepticism, and very much a lack of trust in people. And so while he was brilliant in terms of his external leadership, what was going on behind the scenes was that his staff, and again, because it's a small team that he has across Europe, still substantial, but a small team, the reason that they were staying was because they didn't want to seek another job in the volatile job market. But when I went and spoke to his team, they said that we're absolutely terrified of making mistakes. And a lot of the time we end up making more mistakes because we almost are under the impression that no matter what we do, we're going to be questioned. If, let's say, for example, we miss a deadline or something goes wrong or a paper's missing, we're responded to with the idea with very much that, you're making excuses. It's just not acceptable. I knew this was going to happen. I didn't expect anything less. So if you see, for a man who was so hell-bent on speed, on efficiency and great customer service, was actually very much slowing his team down by the emotional blocks and the mental assumptions that he had of his team that brought brilliant, high-achieving graduates into his office spaces across Europe, and yet they were being slowed down, made to question themselves, constantly worried, constantly stumbling over their words when they were speaking to clients. And I remember having to sit down and say to him that it is this internal distrust or worry or concern that you have that's coming from some element of your upbringing, coming from some adverse experience, that is the very ball and chain of the very thing that you don't want. So the reality or what you want is the very thing. The reality that you don't want, the results or the failures or the slowness that you don't want, that is the antithesis to your work, is the very reality that you're manifesting. This is how critical it is. The internal, the subconscious is playing out in the external realities of these leaders, and yet no one is talking about it. It's such a cost. This is not esotericism. This is not self-love. This is not candles and, Epsom salt, foot soaks. This is a real tangible problem that's not just affecting that leader's professional life, but I'm almost certain that it's affecting their personal life as well. And most importantly, themselves.
I couldn't agree more. I do feel like not understanding your own limiting beliefs, not understanding your own background well enough affects everyone around you. The more you control your controllables, the more you handle who you are and understand who you are, the better you show up for everyone, because you're showing up as your best self. Absolutely. And that helps everyone else. Yeah, I love this part of the discussion, but I want to dig a little bit into why kindness. I mean, I'm going to play a bit of devil's advocate here because, why not just plow through and make some sloppy decisions and then course correct and then, so what if a few good people leave and, you can always hire new people. I've absolutely heard this prescription from some leaders. So why pay attention to kindness? Why is that a big thing?
Well, I think it was Einstein that said, and a friend of mine that reminded me many, many years ago when I was addressing my law work with the same anxiety and distress that I had been addressing it for the first year of university. Einstein said that madness, real madness, is doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result. Now, the problem is that we have and this is really, really key, and I love that you asked me this question, Michael, because it really comes into why kindness. Why do people not see kindness as the necessity of human civilization that it is, was, and always will be? Why? Because when we bandage over something, if we don't have the emotional intelligence to see that it's a bandage and not a full resolution, we can keep going. Why do people, for example, and this is perhaps a little bit emotional, a little bit personal, but let's say someone goes through a period of grief and they start to drink. They will do anything and everything possible to maintain their relationship, their connection with the drink, instead of facing the emotions of grief. When we have the resources, and we can apply that because organizations are not holograms. They're just groups of all people. They're just a cluster of people
Right.
with certain DNA, with certain trauma histories, with certain backgrounds, certain temperaments, clustered together under the name of a company, under the illusion that this is somehow not a human infrastructure. That what tends to happen, like I said, when you apply it, when you have the resources, when you're doing well financially and the numbers are doing well, your customers are happy, for the short term, for at least for the next 20 years, you can get away with these plasterings. You can get away with putting the bandage over the same problem again and again and again, because you've got your meal, you've got your steak. But we are reaching a point in history, which is brilliant, by the way, where everything is documented, where Gen Z, and my cousins always say, no, Meryl, you're not Gen Z. And we had an argument over on ChatGPT. I said, no, I am. I'm 1997. I'm the oldest Gen Z. But so I'm part of this generation where everything can be documented. Everything can be scrutinized. And we have at our fingertips information about the law of attraction, the law of manifestation, trauma, self-love, somatic therapy, EMDR. We have at our fingertips the very capacities to transform 180 tomorrow. So with that comes a greater responsibility for all organizations, for all institutions, to remember and realize that they cannot hide anymore. What worked before is not going to work anymore. Because now, like I said, everything can be documented. Everything can be recorded. People have alternatives to the struggling 9 to 5, to the humiliation ritual of traditional working patterns. What are you going to do now when the mirror is so clear and it's facing you in all directions? You can keep going, but are you going to have a stable, sustainable place in this future where, for example, Gen Z are not drinking, they're not going to clubs, they are refusing these traditional work patterns and these traditional work roles because they've realized they can make money from their talents, they can make money from YouTube, they don't have to deal with colleagues looking down at their food, looking down at the fact that they pace around the office while taking phone calls, that they walk in with a certain outfit that's comfortable for them. They don't have to apologize for their neurodiversity. Do you see, Michael, and I hope you agree, things are becoming really transparent.
Yes.
Things are becoming, the world is heaving and it wants humanness more than ever. And if institutions are not human enough, they're not emotionally alive enough, they're not spiritually attuned, they're not emotionally intelligent enough, there's going to be a problem.
Amen. I mean, I have three daughters, and they give me hope for the future every time that I talk to them. And it doesn't matter. They are 23, 21, and 17. And they give me these views of what the world can become. And I'm so excited about it. And I think you've described it really quite well. They don't have a lot of patience for baloney. They don't have a lot of patience for structures for the sake of structures. They at least with my three daughters, they want to know, how is this actually serving the needs of everybody involved? It's not just the customers or the stockholders. It is people who are doing the work. It is the people who are trying to enjoy a creative life where they're contributing to something bigger than themselves. And if they're not allowed to exercise that creativity, then they're ready to just move on. I once taught somebody a few years ago, and he just joined a job, and within a week he quit the same job. Because he said, they're clearly not prepared for me. They haven't done anything to get ready for me. They said that they would give me all of this training when I showed up. We are a week into it, and they're saying, well, we're getting to that. And he said, well, I'm out. I don't have any reason to be here where people don't respect me enough to do the things that they said that they would do upon my arrival. And I found that just really refreshing, a little bit mind-blowing. I'm a little worried about him, but at the same time, I'm not that worried about him. He made a decision that was grounded in a new set of values, ones that are a bit more authentic than I think the ones that I grew up in. I am not a child of the 90s. I am a child of the 70s. And I think this is the path forward. And so I'm glad that you brought it up. Since you've talked about the future, I now want to pull you into a mind experiment, a thought experiment. Are you good to go,
I just
Meral?
want to add one thing just to complete it. And I
Please.
just want to say that when you have deeper scrutiny, which is facilitated by technology and facilitated by autonomy and the increase in choice, these organizations will have no choice but to step up into excellence. I consider it to be almost the world is in its youngest child era. Now, I'm the oldest daughter, and I have a little sister who's not so little anymore. She is now 19, but I still see her as the 5-year-old gazelle who I am absolutely in love with. The things that I tolerated, she won't even entertain. Because she's seen me, she's seen my sister, she's seen my brother, who are the two middle children, and she's realized that she deserves better. So how can an organization fine-tune itself, meet or be prepared and keep people who have seen that it can get as good as it possibly can, that they have tools that can audit a job and audit a company, audit a conversation, audit a date, and think, you know what, I'm going to reach an objective understanding with the wealth of knowledge behind me to make a sound decision. So it's almost like now we have nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. And therefore, the bandage idea, the bandage thing that we can get away with, this concept where we can just plaster on top of serious cancerous issues, it's just not going to be possible. The world is in its youngest spoiled daughter era. It's no longer the oldest guinea pig daughter or son that will tolerate anything and everything for the sake of bread and water. So I think that for members, probably sounds a little bit stern. But this is the reality. The camera, ChatGPT, the internet, the creator economy has given people the utmost capacity for informed choice. Are they going to choose subpar processes? Are they going to choose toxic management? Are they going to choose recruitment processes that have absolutely no ability to really bring out the best of the talents and the capacities and the potential of these multi-dimensional individuals who are learning and growing in their hobbies and their talents day by day? That's all I wanted to say, and I'm excited for the thought experiment, the mind experiment.
Yes, our little thought experiment. I have a lot of hope for the future. And I think that what you just said really gives me even more. And I'm dying to hear your answer to this next piece. So, Meral, you and I are going to get into a time machine. Maybe we're with Doctor Who and we are hopping in there with the doctor, and he or she says, we're going 100 years into the future and humanity has done all of the right things. All of them. Imagine it. We've done it. So we step out of the time machine into the world. It is 2126. Anybody that we knew is long gone. What are you looking for to confirm that you were just told the truth, that we did all the right things?
It's so emotional, and thank you for bringing the doctor in. I am a massive fan of Doctor Who, and he really was my childhood hero, and he sort of raised me to be kind. I think, that TV show,
Absolutely. I do have to ask you very quickly, who is your doctor?
Tennant, or any of the agents who are watching this.
Okay. He's
I am dying to meet you, David Tennant, to thank you for the fact that you saved my childhood. And you are as kind, he's as kind off screen as he is, the person that he portrays. How rare is that? back to the TARDIS opening the doors.
Yes.
Okay, this is a bit of an emotional answer.
Yes.
How at rest do young people, children look on the street? How integrated are they into society? How at peace do their faces look? Because the ultimate mark of a society that is spiritually and emotionally mindful, thorough, and safe is the condition of its children. The condition of those that we are the custodians of, those who are vulnerable. And the reason that I say that is because now, and it breaks my heart, the average young person is as lonely as a senior citizen was 30 years ago. And the work that I do when I have, children or young people as clients who come in for therapy and for mental health intervention, the lives that they have, loneliness, the fact that something genuinely has been stolen from them across the pandemic years, not feeling like they have any space in the world, bed rotting, spending their years, best of their years underneath a blanket, feeling like they don't belong, feeling like the world that I grew up in, the world that you grew up in far more than I did in the 90s, where we played up until we were forced home by our parents shouting across the street, "Come home." They don't have that. And a school system that has now become very much the expression of the socio-political and financial volatility of the world today.
Yeah.
And it is utterly, utterly heartbreaking. Crime rates have increased. Loneliness rates have increased. Domestic violence has increased. Suicide rates have increased. Young people today genuinely feel like there's nothing for them. And I think for me as well, as someone who experienced childhood adversity, the reason for kindness was because I never wanted anyone to feel as lonely as I did all of those years. So I would say that is going to be the mark. But yes, of course, we can talk about, let's say, people are genuinely at peace with themselves, that we have in schools, we teach kindness, that schools are designed, and that's one of my greatest dreams, to have kindness schools that are absolutely based on the furthering, on the nurturing, on the systemization of kindness into teaching, systemization of kindness into schedules, even, starting school later and finishing, at a certain point, concentrating certain activities, certain skills for children as young as possible in order to prevent some of these things that then create a world where we have adults as bullies and adults as traumatized and adults who are, on the fringes of lawlessness because of that lack and that neglect in those foremost years. Parks and centers of recreation and stillness, transport systems that are not terrifying and are not exhausting for sensitive people, for emotionally sensitive people, which is all of us, so that the transport areas that we have where people interact in mass doesn't impact their personal lives, doesn't impact their work performance, doesn't impact the equilibrium. It is so very important for worthwhile human life. And overall, I almost imagine, and I know I don't want it to be almost like a Black Mirror episode where people are looking for ways to be kind so that they can put it on their scorecard, but just people to be more aware of themselves and to be more considerate and to be slightly more emotionally alive, because the infrastructure, because the foremost support systems of school and education and even within the home inspires compassion. And we see that on the street. So an emotional answer and perhaps a systemic answer as well.
It's a beautiful answer. So David Tennant, the 10th Doctor or 14th Doctor, depending on how you count, turns to you and says, That sounds like a lovely thing that we can look at right now. But I told you we did all of the right things to get here. What are those right things, Meryl?
I used to be, I would have given you this, and this, and this, and this. But I really, really think that we need to reintroduce what kindness really is. And that requires a global public awareness of redefining and therefore reintroducing and therefore rehabilitating human mass consciousness, global consciousness on what kindness is. When I came into the space, Michael, it was very much in the business space. It was very much about random acts of kindness and without much of the human effort to really define what kindness genuinely is. It's not nice. It's not random. It's not soft. It can be, and it's beautiful that it is. It's not a weakness. It's not a luxury. And it's not something that we do at whim. I really believe, and I think maybe I've grown in these last 2 years from an idealist to an idealist with awareness, that we need to spend at least the next 5 or 10 years just redefining and challenging the public perspective of what kindness is and what it is not. And then bringing those systems of kindness into workplaces so that it's not, right now, I think, Michael, it's very much about, it depends upon the actor to hold up kindness, to hold it up, to hold up compassion, to hold up emotional intelligence. Even the most beautiful soul becomes drained because if we don't have this systemic apparatus to make kindness almost a given, almost like the soil of the earth, the soil of an organization, the soil of institutions, the soil of governance processes, rather than tending or being so obsessed with the leaves, making the leaves look as wonderful as possible. We need to tend to the soil. So I've created some kindness systems, and there are amazing people who have also created it. We need to enact these into organizations, into communities, into education. It's not so much, I think there was someone who was asked the question about empathy, and they said, we need to teach teachers to be kinder. But if they're underpaid and overworked, and they're under-supported and under-resourced,
Right.
that is a burden upon them rather than something they would willingly take on. So systemizing it into these main areas of human existence, from governance to executive decision-making in the boardroom, in workplaces, and even within the home, so that with that, it starts to become a given. It starts to organically grow rather than something that we dictate. So I think that probably a very generic answer, but I think one that is, because I've spent 2 years in this space, Michael, I've seen a lot of skepticism. I've seen a lot of closed doors. I've seen a lot of, pushback, and I've seen a lot of celebration. But what I've found is that people, because of the trauma and the fact that they've, a lot of people say to me, I was kind when I was a child, but I'm not anymore because of what I've experienced. That is the experience of 99.999% of people. We need to spend time on, so I'll tell you I had a keynote, and I'm imagining right now my brain is sort of jumping because I'm so passionate, but there's just so many nuances. Delivered a keynote to a group of business people, professionals, just, brilliant, talented people on kindness as infrastructure. I had zero questions about infrastructural implementation of kindness. They were more concerned and they were more stuck on what kindness is and the skepticism around kindness. I've realized that we do need to start there. I don't think that even the people who talk about kindness, even with me, I don't think that we are all on the same page about what kindness is. Perhaps we should start there. That's the reality of it, for me at least.
I love the answer because it is not a typical answer. The answer, it isn't. I mean, a lot of people say, oh, well, we need to strengthen this institution and do this to help the children. I mean, I've heard lots of great answers, but this is the icing on the cake. This is the pinnacle of answers for this. The idea that we would take kindness and look at it so carefully and so closely that we all understand what it is and how it is the centerpiece for everything that we should be doing. I love that answer.
Thank you,
I
Michael.
love it. I love it. I love it.
I just think that there is a mental and emotional and spiritual and trauma block that touches kindness. And, I've recently been doing a lot of work on myself. So my whole life was very much about this honorable, Herculean, medieval kind of chivalry brand of kindness, but I was very much neglecting the person within. And I think a lot of kind people they begin with being very nice, being people pleasing, being all of these things, and very much neglecting the person from within. And, when you talk to people about kindness, you talk to people about compassion, you talk to people about generosity, they are so, and you can see it in their eyes, they're so glazed over and so taken and so grab holden, if that's a word, of the traumatizing moments in their lives where they perhaps fell in love with someone and gave their entire heart, or they loved their parents and they still do, but they received so little back, or they gave to a stranger, they gave to a friend, and they were absolutely brutalized and betrayed by it. And now they associate kindness as the red button of self-detonation, that it's the surefire path to self-betrayal, self-abandonment, and self-destruction. They want nothing to do with it. Even those who talk about kindness, even with me, until I touch that inner dimension, we've all been traumatized by what we have considered to be kindness. If we do not touch upon the inner dimension of public consciousness, we're not going to get anywhere. That's the reality of it.
I believe that. Yeah, I believe it. I absolutely believe it. When the world gets heavy and you feel weary and you've been doing all of this really hard work, Meral, how do you reach, what do you reach for? How do you recharge? How do you find inspiration again? Is there a set of books that you read? Is there a podcast that you reach for? Do you listen to music? Do you go into nature? What are your ways of finding inspiration on those really hard days?
I used to always, when I talked about myself, I always used to have this prelude in my dialogue that I don't want this to sound narcissistic or self-serving. Perhaps after 28 years, Michael, I really have the honor of sitting before someone who is so psychologically safe for me and saying that the ultimate inspiration comes from within. Because the ultimate and the most reliable and the most sincere source of self-replenishment can only come from within. There's a saying that my aunt always has. She says in Farsi, she says, which means if I don't exist, if I am impaired, what is of the world? What is of the world? If the self is being drained, or there's something that I am not giving or replenishing from within, that's going to show up in the work that I do. What we've done is we've colonized and capitalized the concept of self-love. That it's about waking up and putting 12 or 16 beauty products from across the world, from Korean makeup to American or however, on our faces, having all of these interesting drinks and a very, very Instagram-worthy breakfast, and doing robotic affirmations and then cutting people off because they did not meet our sky-high standards, and then dressing and then going and taking gym selfies and telling ourselves that we love ourselves at the cost of others. That is not self-love. That is not self-replenishment. To look into the self and to genuinely, and then there's a saying in Farsi and it's hard to translate, but to cast a merciful hand over the self, over the fore and the head and the shoulders and the hands of the self, is the only recipe for genuine activism, genuine leadership, genuine change, because that weariness is a reflection of your own state. I don't believe it's the actual objective reality of the world. Something has to be recalibrated from within so that others do not get hurt from our hand, so that the mission does not wane, so that the beauty of the world does not dim in our eyes, because we are, you and I and so many kindness pioneers, are teaching the world that there's still something to be salvaged from it. How can we do it? That's why, I used to reach for books. And sometimes when I tell my aunt and my mum, they're both big bookworms. When I tell them about the work that I'm doing from within, and it's not just about standing in front of the mirror and saying, I love myself and I have really high standards and I'm not going to tolerate this. But it's about what can I do from within so that I can serve deeper. And they always say, give me a book, give me something to read. I genuinely believe, and this is coming from a bookworm, sometimes we avoid the real work by hopping onto a podcast, hopping onto a book, doing something external, rather than meeting the eyes in the mirror and saying, what can I do for you so that my mission, my existence, whoever it touches, is worthwhile and is sincere and is true.
I am very, very grateful that you've taken the time to be here on Our Future is Kind. Before we wrap up, can you please just tell everybody in the audience, what is your next big thing and how can people reach you so that they can get in your orbit and get some of that great energy from you?
And genuinely, you and I, this is a global movement, and you and I both said that this will outlive us, and so it should. So this is a movement of a world that we do not need to heal from, that we do not need to spend our adult lives healing from, that we do not need to escape, that we do not need to feel like we cannot wrestle with. At the moment, my next big thing is launching my speaking business and writing my flagship book. I have the manifesto in front of me. It is on Amazon, but I'm not here to really make money from the manifesto. The manifesto is a declaration of what's to come. It's the flagship book that I'm writing, Kindness as Infrastructure, the next state of human civilization. And the manifesto is really very much a prelude to that. So it talks about the kindness index that I've developed and governance, the ecosystemic philosophy, the kindness as living order. It's a new way of imagining kindness. And I think that if we really want to make any change in the world as a policymaker, as a business leader, as a citizen, as a mother, as a housewife, as a father, as a young person, we need to make civilizational transformation. And if this is something that you're interested in, if this is something that gives you hope, and so you should hold hope, that is your human right. I'm available on almost all social media platforms, except from Facebook, Meral Alizada, or Results of Kindness. And I would be delighted to have a conversation. This is the movement that's for all of us. It's not anyone's enclosed IP. The best people who have ever been kind are the ones who speak the least about it.
Well, I'm glad that you took time to speak with us about it. And so thank you for all of the listeners of Our Future is Kind podcast. Thank you, Meral Alizada.
Thank you so much, Mike.
For being here.
It's been an utter joy.
This episode's Kindness Challenge. Pick one friction point, such as a meeting, and make one kindness as infrastructure tweak that reduces stress for others, such as a clearer agenda or a quieter setting. Test it for 7 days. Ask one person what improved. Want to stay inspired so you can stay kind? Inspiration comes from within. Practice self-mercy daily. 60 seconds of honest mirror check-in. Name one inner need, like rest, clarity, or courage, and do one small act to meet it, and then serve from steadiness. You've been listening to Our Future is Kind podcast, where building what's next is a choice. Make your next choice a good one and help build the future we want to live in.